So your seat good? Get the mirrors all adjusted? You can see everything okay? Just stay off the freeways, all right? I don't want you going out on those yet. Just leave your phone in your purse. I don't want you texting. All right?
Daddy, okay.
Okay. There you go. Be careful.
Thanks, Dad.
Call me, but not while you're driving.
Happy Father's Day, I guess. I kind of in that world right now. Want to say hi to everybody joining us right now. So those of you in Cody and Butte, sure, some Butte people are here, as I'm sure the Butte people heard all the way from Butte. Hi, guys. And sure excited about Butte these days. There's good days ahead for that campus, so happy for you. Let's see who else. Lockwood and Plentywood, if you're joining us online, welcome to you. Really glad to be a part of you. You know, we love Jesus here. We really like our church. Hope that you'll like it too. And as we all pursue Christ together. We are in a series called Born to Leave. We're talking about parenting, so appropriate to do this on Father's Day. And next week, I sure invite you to come back because my precious wife is going to preach with me. So I'm going to have Rami on the stage, and we are going to talk about parenting. And what we're going to do is talk about the things that we did well and the things we did poorly. Kind of a list of things we do again and things we do different. We've actually interviewed our two daughters on this, and just so you know, the list of things we did wrong is a lot longer than the list of things we did right, according to them. And so we'll share some of that with you, and hopefully you can learn from it. Last week, what we did is talked about prophet or prodigal. The idea here is that our kids are born to leave. We are not raising children, we're raising adults. And we don't want them to be children forever, we want them to be adults. And we are preparing them to leave our homes. And they're gonna leave, and they're gonna leave as prophet or prodigal. They're gonna leave, well or not. And we have something that we can do about that. And so we looked at last week 3 character qualities that we found out of the life of Joseph. And that was the first half. This is part 2 now today. We're going to look at the second 3 character qualities from the life of Joseph that are things that we want to build into our kids so that they will be ready to leave because they are born to leave. 96% of parents want to get better at it. Not sure what the deal is with the other 4%, but 96% of parents want to get better at it. 60% of parents rely on their own childhood experiences for guidance. Only 20% get guidance from the Bible, and that is too bad because the Bible is rich with parenting principles, things that we need to instill in our children. I mentioned Larry Fowler to you, who wrote this book, Modern Day Joseph, and he was on an airplane and he found himself sitting next to a guy who was a tech executive. He was a young guy who helped internet startup companies successfully identify their vision and then develop a strategy to reach that vision. And as they talked, he found out that he had 2 young kids. And so Larry asked the guy, he says this, what do you want to be able to say about your children when they're 30? And the guy said, wow, never thought that far into the future. College educated, I guess, a good career, happily married. And so then Larry asked this question. Well, what would cause you to grieve if you had to say it about your children when they're 30? He said, that they're lost or failed morally or are addicted to something. Then Larry says, well, do you know when the best time, the best opportunity is to impact your children? And he said, no, when? He said, before they're 12, because the major attitudes of life are formed by them. The basic foundations of decision-making are instilled and are in place before the teen years. And then Larry hits him with this gem. So your specialty at work is developing strategy for companies, helping them set vision. Yet you've never thought of having one for your own children? And the guy goes, no, oh, wow, no. And so Larry started talking to him about Joseph. what we looked at last week, what we'll look at again, is that Joseph is the bullseye. We got to be aiming for something. You don't drift into good parenting. You actually plan for it and strategize around it and order your life around some principles and some strategies of instilling these things in your kids. And so last week we talked about 3 areas: respect, wisdom, and forgiveness. Respect, wisdom, and forgiveness. If you missed that one, you can get it online, iTunes, or whatever. And today we're going to talk about 3 more. We're going to start in Genesis 45. I'm taking you to 3 places in Genesis. If you got your text with you today, go to Genesis 45, please. Now, for those of you that are a little unfamiliar with the Joseph story, very brief recap here is that Joseph, kind of an industrious 17-year-old kid, gets sold into slavery in Egypt, ends up in this guy Potiphar's house. He lives righteously, does well, gets framed for rape and gets thrown in prison, does really well there, comes out of prison, and then rises to number 2 in the entire empire, which basically made him the most powerful person in the whole world because Pharaoh just let him run the empire and he ran it impeccably. And so it was going so well because there was a famine and Egypt had stored up all of this grain because of Joseph's leadership that now nations are coming to Egypt to buy food. Joseph's brothers come to Egypt. It was his brothers that sold him into slavery. So they come to Egypt to buy grain. They had no idea that the Egyptian ruler was actually their brother. And in God's sovereignty, we say the word sovereignty a lot in Christianity. Sovereignty means that God is the supreme ruler, that he orders the universe, that nothing escapes him, that his plan is perfect. Okay, that's the idea of God's sovereignty. In God's sovereignty, he used the brothers' heinous deeds of selling Joseph to slave traders to actually preserve the brother's life. Now, Joseph had this figured out. He knew that God had maneuvered all this and arranged all this for this to happen. But the brothers didn't know this. And so the famine, so they get some food and they go back home. Well, the famine gets worse, and so they come back a second time to buy grain. And this time, Joseph is going to reveal to them that he is their brothers. It's been a couple of decades. All right, so all that now, this is Genesis 45, starting in verse 4. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt." Okay, quick aside right here. You see where it says, "Come close to me"? A couple of things that are happening there. One is they wouldn't have recognized him because Joseph would have been clean shaven. He was in Egypt, and that was sort of the way they did things there. So he would have been bald, and his beard would be gone. He'd be very, very smooth in his skin. The Hebrew people are very hairy, so they'd had long hair and their beards, and so they came in looking like that. And so they would not have recognized Joseph because he wasn't looking like one of their brothers, the Hebrew, okay? Now here's the second thing, and we'll just go quickly over this, but it's a trip. Most scholars think that the reason that he says to them, "Come close to me," I won't spend a long time on this, but here you go. What he was doing was showing them that he is circumcised, because the Egyptians did not do that. Of course, the Hebrews did. And so to prove that he is actually their brother, he shows them that he is circumcised. Okay, that was just for free. Let's move on. But it's interesting, isn't it? It might be the only thing you remember from this whole sermon. Enjoy your dinner conversation. Okay, and now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves. See, they realize like, oh my gosh, it's our brother, for selling me here because it was to save lives that God sent me here ahead of you. For 2 years now there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will not be plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, you who sold me into slavery, but God did it. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. Your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds and all that you have, I will provide for you there because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. And so what is this character quality that Joseph had? Joseph had a sense of destiny. He had a sense of God's purpose for his life. He had a sense of God's calling, a sense of God's plan, his grander plan for his life. It's the famous Mark Twain quote, "The two most important days of your life is the day that you were born and the day that you figured out why you were born." And he has this figured out. God is so personal and loving and intentional that he knows the plans that he has for our kids. And so our job as parents is to help them discern and discover that plan, that destiny, that purpose, and that calling for their lives. Joseph understood his. He understood his destiny. A couple things about this. First, Joseph realized his new identity. Did you notice in verse 8 that he says his identity, who he is? Father, Lord, ruler. The repetition of those three indicate his power and his authority, that he is the man. He became father of Pharaoh, he says, Lord and ruler in a large part because of his hardship. The hardship and the suffering was part of the plan. He realized that there was a purpose in all of that pain, and he certainly didn't see it when he got thrown into the pit or sold as a slave or framed and thrown into prison, when he was forgotten and forsaken. But I wonder if he got through all of that difficulty and hardship and trial because his parents taught him that God does have a purpose for your life, and he even has a purpose in the pain you experience, even though you can't see it right now. And we have got to teach our kids this. Now, there's more on this in a moment. But the first thing I want you to notice is that he knew what he was made for. He'd embraced, this is all, the reason all this happened is because this is my destiny, is to actually save the lives of millions. Now, the second thing about this is that Joseph understood that it was God's calling in his life. So he understood and was submissive to God's plan for his life. His destiny was decided by God. It was for God to choose. It was God doing this. So you notice in verse 5, it says God sent. You notice in verse 7, it says God sent. Verse 8, God sent. Verse 9, God made. God is the one that was doing all of this, maneuvering things behind the scenes. Joseph understood that God arranged the circumstance so that Joseph would be God's man in this particular circumstance. Now, don't you think that God is still doing that? Look, the Bible is not what God did. The Bible is what God does. God is still doing this. He is still arranging circumstances. He's still calling people to fulfill their destiny. God has a plan for our children. So we get to train our children up in their calling, their purpose, their destiny, God's plan for them. Okay, but how do we do that? So just a few little ideas for you. One of the things that my parents taught us well, and that I've tried to do with my parents, or my kids, is to stay in God's will. And my mom a lot of times talked to me about how there's like safety and protection under the protection. She talked about God's umbrella of protection for us, that God blesses obedience. And so we got to teach our kids it's in their best interest to obey God. You stay in God's will when you are doing what God wants you to do and obeying his laws. Another thing that we talk about is seeking first the kingdom of God. And so we teach our kids, like, look, whatever's going on and whatever you're pursuing, we are going to seek God's kingdom first. We're going to live life as though Jesus were living through us. And then all of these things will be added unto you as well. So all of these desires and hopes that you have for your life, good. Seek God first, and he will add those things accordingly to you in just the right timing and in just the right way, seeking first the kingdom. Another thing we talk about is trusting in the Lord with all of your heart, leaning not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. And so we teach our kids to trust God. And when we do these three things, obey God, seek first the kingdom, and trust him, we are staying in his will. Now, then there's the kind of practical things like understanding your kid's temperament and skill set and their gift mix and their personality and guiding them accordingly. My parents had to definitely parent me differently than my brother and my sister. And so you figure out the way they're wired and they're bent and help guide them towards something that they won't be frustrated in for the rest of their lives. But it's kind of the way God made him. God made Joseph to be as successful as he was. He was in his sweet spot, we say. Now, please, don't tell your children that they can do whatever they put their mind to. Don't do that to them. I mean, it's because parents do that American Idol is so funny. Right? Like, people lie to their kids. You can do anything you put your mind to. I want to be an offensive lineman. Yeah, you weigh $150 and your bones are brittle, but you can do it if you put your mind to it. Here's a steroid. Really? Like, no. Easy on that one. Instead, what you're telling them is, you can do whatever God calls you to. Joseph's parents didn't go, hey, you can be the leader of Egypt. No, they said, you can do whatever God calls you to. Happened to be that God called him to be the leader of Egypt. How many people does he call to lead Egypt? A couple. So he's got a different calling for your kid. So we don't tell them that they can be whatever they put their mind to. Matter of fact, we kind of can't trust them to put their mind to something. We want them to put their heart and their mind in what God wants them to do, seeking first the kingdom of God, and then the dreams are being fulfilled because you're doing what God wants you to do, and he's going to fulfill it. And then there's the submission to God's plan. However it starts working its way out. And so sometimes things get derailed, right? And so if their sense of destiny is centered on themselves, if it's centered on their skills, then things outside of their control will demolish that dream. But if their destiny is centered on God's call for their lives, God's plan for them, and God's sovereignty over all of that, then the trials and challenges will only serve to strengthen that destiny. A couple of months ago, I was watching ESPN, and they were doing a piece on the Indiana Pacers in preparation for the playoffs. And so for those of you that don't care, let me just get you caught up here. So the Indiana Pacers played the Miami Heat in the conference finals last year, and then they lost. It was very close, and they talked all this last season about how they were motivated to meet those guys again in the conference finals, but this time win and go to the NBA finals. And so they were doing this piece on these guys, and the camera was in the gym while they were practicing, and their coach is a good guy named Frank Vogel. And Frank Vogel is pacing the sideline while these guys are practicing, and he's yelling this to them: champions behave like champions before they're champions. Champions behave like champions before they're champions. Well, I love that perspective. That perspective is, you don't become a champion and then figure out how to act like one. You actually prepare to be a champion by acting like one now, and it will be a part of you fulfilling that. And so, those of you who don't care, let me just get you caught up. Here's what happened this year. The Indiana Pacers met the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals, and they got beat again and kind of drubbed. And one of the players, the guy that was responsible for garnering the best player in the world, LeBron James, a couple of times on the floor actually leaned over and blew in James's ear. Blew in his ear. He was just trying to get in his head. It didn't work. Really what he should have been doing, because champions behave like champions before they're champions, what he should have been doing is playing lockdown defense and lighting it up on offense. But instead he was resorting to a little trick and trying to blow in his ear. The best basketball player in the world, and you're going to derail him by blowing in his ear? I don't think so. And what I thought was hilarious about the whole thing is that the consummate champion, the GM, Larry Bird, is sitting in the stands watching one of his players blowing LeBron James's ear and getting drubbed on the court. And Larry Bird was a champion like when he came out of the womb. His whole life he's behaved like a champion, and those guys are now sitting at home again. Champions behave like champions before they're champions. Joseph behaved like a champion in captivity, in temptation, in prison. He did all of that he acted like a champion before he came a champion. And what did he become? Father of Pharaoh, Lord and ruler of the most powerful empire on the planet. And he did it because he knew God had a good plan for him. And so he trusted God to work out the plan, even when things weren't going very well. We got to help our kids understand that God has a great plan for their lives, help them discover that destiny, even in the midst of circumstances that might say otherwise, because champions behave like champions before they're champions. That's number one. It's actually number 4 because we did 3 last week. Here's the next one. Let me just give you this one and then I'll unpack it. Work. Work. We got to teach our kids to work. I make much of this one. I heard Dr. Ben Carson the other day say this. We used to be a can-do society. Now we are a what-can-you-do-for-me society. That never elevates a society. It always leads to the decline of a society. It's worth repeating. We used to be a can-do society. Now we are a what-can-you-do-for-me society. That never elevates society. It always leads to the decline of the society. And I would ask us to be a part of elevating a society. You don't get to be the most powerful man in Egypt, especially while having the wrong ethnicity and the wrong religion, without a stellar work ethic. When we get introduced to Joseph in the Joseph narrative, he's working. He's 17 years old and he's tending the flocks. He'd been doing this for years. His dad tells Joseph to go check on the brothers who are tending their flocks near Shechem. Okay, it's just that they're in Hebron. So that means that's a journey of 50 miles. He's not taking a moped, by the way, right? He's not driving there. He's walking 50 miles to go check on the brothers. When he gets there, so they're not there, and somebody tells him that they've moved on to Dothan. That's another 15 miles. That means that this kid went on it would have been a 130-mile round trip. Of course, he only got half of that because of what they did to him. 17 years old. Travels 130 miles was going to be his trip. You can't even get your kid to walk home from school. Right? Hey, we're not, your mom and I, but neither of us can get to. You're going to have to walk home today. I'll have stumps by the time I reach home. Work. In Egypt, Potiphar learns that he can trust Joseph. And the reason he could learn that he could trust Joseph is because of God's blessing in Joseph's life. But Joseph was also working hard and producing. And so here's what Potiphar does. I'm going back to 39. I'm going to show you 2 verses in 39. Verse 6, so he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Because of Joseph's great work ethic, he took care of the whole household. Then he gets thrown in prison for a crime he didn't commit. The warden puts him in charge of all the inmates for kind of the same reason. Verse 23, the warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care. The Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. I think it's interesting that both Potiphar and the warden and later Pharaoh paid no attention to daily organization because Joseph was so capable. He's later exonerated. He becomes number 2 in the land, which makes him the number 1 most powerful person in the world, running the whole country, saving countless lives in famine. And it's because he was a great businessman, he was a great leader, and it was all because the kid could work. We were created to work. You know that in Genesis, God gave us the gift of work. That we lack dignity when we don't work. And so we actually do our kids a disservice if we don't teach them what God expects from them and don't teach them the blessing that they get by working. God gave them the blessing of work. So my dad worked. I know my dad worked. He worked hard. My dad owned his own business, and like every small business owner, working hard. Worked hard around the house. I noticed that from a very young age, kind of picked up on that. My mom worked very hard around the household, kind of holding the household together, that I was systematically tearing apart, the whirling dervish, little Tasmanian devil running around the place, and mom kind of held the place together. My parents taught us to work. They taught us to work in part because they didn't just give us money. As a matter of fact, when we were little kids, just about the time we started to walk, my parents actually had us clean the house. So one of our jobs was to clean the house, like I'm gonna get in trouble, like cleaning the house. So vacuuming and dusting and washing things, and there was a rotation, and we'd get paid for it. And if we did a good job, we'd get paid well. And then we didn't just take the money and run. No, actually, mom and dad had this system where there was a ledger. Each one of us had our own ledger, and we would write down the amount of money we made and why we made it in the date and keep the tally. And then if we were taking money out, we'd use red bad. We'd use red and do this subtraction, and take that money. And they taught us to manage money while they were teaching us to work. They taught us to work while they were teaching us to manage money. I had to mow the lawn about the time I could reach the handle, I was mowing. No self-propelled mower in our house, and a big yard. And I remember one time my dad coming home from work, and I had mowed and did what I was supposed to do, and he took me out in the backyard. He goes, "Now, Greg, that we can't do." And you know how when you're mowing sometimes, you know how you're trying to bite off as much as you can, but if you get a little too much, then there's a little thread or a little strip of grass that's sticking up. You with me? Right? That didn't get cut down and so Dad would go, "Now, you're biting off too much. You need to overlap those wheels so that you're getting that every single time. I don't want to see these here." And then, he'd say dad things like, if there's a job worth doing, it's worth doing right. And I'm like, well, maybe mowing's not worth doing. Turns out that was the wrong thing to say in that moment. One of the reasons we bought horses for our children, our two daughters, is because those things are a lot of work. Now, it's well known, well attested that the millennials are now the entitlement generation, entitlement culture. That ain't their fault. We did that. Helicopters, coddlers, we did that. John Townsend's writing a book about the entitlement culture. It's called Do Hard Things. In the intro to the book, he talks about his son who called him one day and said, "Dad, I'm the number one intern." He was at a major corporation. There were 15 interns. He says, "I'm the number one intern." He's like, "What does that even mean?" He said, "Well, all of my colleagues, my fellow interns, they asked 2 questions when we started our first day. What time do we get off? How much do we get paid?" He said, "I asked, what else can I do?" Vaulted him to number 1. John Maxwell, a leadership guru, talks about a time when a young man came to him and asked him for some advice because he was starting his very first job after college. So Maxwell gave him these 3 pieces of advice. I give them to you. First, do more than is expected every day. He said, arrive at work 30 minutes early, eat lunch in half the time allotted, and work 30 minutes after quitting time. Second, do something every day to help the people around you. You add value to others, you add value to your team, and you're going to win over your coworkers. Third, go the extra mile for the boss. Make an appointment with him. Let him know that if he needs anything extra done, no matter how menial, that you will do it, you are available to help. Kid was a VP in the company by the time he was 30 because he could work. Got to teach our kids to work. We teach them to work for their good and for the good of society, because we used to be a can-do society. Now we're a what can you do for me society, and that never elevates society. That always leads to the decline of a society. Let's elevate the society. If anybody ever elevated a society, it was Joseph, and the kid could work. Third one, actually the 5th one, 6th one. So, look, man, I'm a words person, not a math person. So, because of Joseph's submission to God and God's plan for his life, and because of his exceptional work ethic, the whole nation has food to eat during the famine. Other nations are coming to Egypt to get food, okay? By the way, Egypt got really wealthy at this time. This is supply and demand. There was lots of demand, and the only supply was in Egypt, and it was because of Joseph's hard work and his great leadership and his business acumen that this happened. Now, Joseph's dad and his brothers actually moved to Egypt. We saw that. He's inviting them to come to Egypt. And so they were going to stay just for the season of the famine, but they ended up staying 17 years. 17 years pass, and Jacob, Israel, Joseph's dad, dies. Well, this caused grave concern for Joseph's brothers because they suspect that the reason that Joseph has been merciful to them is out of respect for his father Jacob. But now that the patriarch is dead, what will Joseph do to the brothers that betrayed him a couple of decades earlier? So they're worried about this. Okay, you got all that? All right, now I'm going over to Genesis 50. Starting 15, little summary. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?" So they sent word to Joseph saying, "Your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you're to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now, please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father." When their message came to him, Joseph wept. Pause there with me. Why did he weep? The reason he wept is because he knew that the brothers made this up. It's a little syrupy, it's over the top. They knew that Joseph loved Jacob, and so they're like, "Hey, on behalf of Jacob, be nice to us." And they made it up, and Joseph is overcome with sadness that these guys had been with him for 17 years, and they never once believed that Joseph actually forgave them. It is so sad when people don't accept forgiveness. They live under this burden of guilt. And Joseph's heart is broken for them. God gives you forgiveness, receive it. When people give you forgiveness, receive it. Don't live under that guilt. It is so sad. And so Joseph wept. Verse 18, his brothers then came, threw themselves down before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid." Now look at this. Am I in the place of God? Who am I to not forgive you? Am I in the place of God? Only God gets to make that decision. You intended to harm me. This is one of the most important verses in the Bible. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. I love this line. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Bless you. Now, this principle that somebody put into Joseph is a principle of perspective. We already talked about forgiveness. That's certainly in here. But this is about perspective. This is perspective. See, if Romans 8:28 had been written by then, I think Joseph would have recited it. All things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. The things that have happened to me, all of those, God took them and he molded them into something beautiful. In our entitlement, blame, victim, what can you do for me? You owe me culture. Our kids are growing up in that culture, so they need this one. It's huge. In this, Joseph stands out as extraordinary. Already once, a couple of decades earlier, Joseph had a sense of God's plan and his destiny for him, and he's reinforcing it here. See, his brothers intended to harm him, but God and his good plan overruled the brothers' evil plan, and actually, this is crazy, God took evil, turned it into something great, saved lives because of it. And so then what Joseph did, because of all of that, and because he believed that God did that, and he had that proper perspective, then Joseph aligned his future actions with God's plan, meaning, you saw it in verse 21, that he's going to take care of these guys and their children, and he's going to be a blessing to them. That's what's so critical about this. The perspective of God's good plan then moves people to action. When you're going through difficult stuff, and we know you go through difficult things, and there's hard times, and you can blame God for that, or you can go, God's going to use this. I've got a perspective that under his sovereignty, God's going to use this powerful thing in my life. And then I'm going to get to bless people because of it. Maybe you'll save lives as a result of it. This perspective is so critical. While I was working on this sermon, I got an email from our skipper, the guy that skippers our racing sailboat. His name is Tim, about his brother Pete. And Pete is one of the finest J-24 sailors in North America. And Pete has had a lot of success in a boat called B4G. It's his boat, and it's a great boat. It's very fast. It's one of the best boats in the country, probably. And through some circumstances, Pete had to come to the decision where he needed to sell this boat. And so he sold it to a guy in Michigan, and shipping company comes to the house and picks up this boat, on a trailer and begins to haul it east. And Pete said that when the boat pulled away from his house, he felt like a piece of him going with that boat. It's sailors in their boats, right? You know about this. In South Dakota, a big storm hit the interstate, and wind, hail, rain, and blew that boat off the trailer while it was going down the interstate, and it just tumbled and just splintered. Nothing you could do. It's done. It's gone. And so I heard about that, and I grabbed my phone, and I texted Pete, hey, and I just said, sorry, Pete, praying for you, just knowing kind of how this feels. Here's what Pete writes back. He says, glad to hear from you. It means a lot. The reality, of course, is that it is a plastic toy. And nobody got hurt, so it'll all be just fine. The bummer is that the buyers are now stuck dealing with the hauler's insurance company, who, of course, is trying already to point fingers at everybody else, including me and the hauler, etc. But it will all be okay in the end, I am sure. And this is nothing like what Joseph went through, but he acknowledges that. It's plastic. It's not flesh. And I know Pete's dad. He's a guy that would instill in his boys a proper perspective about stuff, possessions, and things, and people. I borrowed a buddy's truck once, and I just drilled a deer with it, just blew up the front end of it, and it's good eating, but that's a different part of the story. And I was so embarrassed and bummed when I took the truck over to him, and he goes, Vern, it's metal, plastic, and glass. It's not flesh. You're okay. It's just metal, plastic, and glass. We'll fix it. Perspective, right? When our kids face hardship, injustice, how about even things that are not fair? Yep, it's not fair. Okay, it's not fair. We've got to help them handle that with dignity and faith and perspective that God is in control. And yeah, some days he is going to give you more than you can handle. You just got to be ready for that. And then you interpret those difficult circumstances in light of God's sovereignty. You've got to have a perspective that things are going to go wrong. And so how you respond to that is really what matters here. How you trust God in what just happened and what he's going to do out of that, that's what matters. Having a proper perspective about this difficult thing that you're facing. Nobody likes to see their kid in pain or sad or discouraged or mistreated, especially not mistreated. But man, in your sympathy, we can't let them play the victim. We got to help them see a bigger picture. The bigger picture of God's plan for them and the benefit of handling that hardship with dignity and faith and trust and this perspective that God's going to do something beautiful through this difficult thing that we're experiencing. And so when you do that, it helps keep them from depression. It helps diffuse anger because all anger is the result of an unmet expectation, and we're developing a generation of people who think that expect happiness all the time. And so all kinds of people are bummed because we're not all happy all the time. And, Joseph forgave his brothers rather than lashing out at them because they messed with his happiness. Perspective helps deflate an overactive ego that really God's in control and not you. And this kind of perspective gives strength for the storms because the pain is short term, but there's going to be something bigger and better. And the storm makes you strong. No pity parties. I'm almost done, but let me tell you this. So I was helping a guy fence. So he was a guy and his teenage son, and I was helping him stretch barbed wire fencing. Fence stretchers are dangerous things, right? Those things can go bad in a hurry. There's a lot of things on there that can hurt you. And so we're cranking on this thing and tightening it up and getting it, nice and tight. And sure enough, the thing blows up and goes shooting off there and hits his son in the hand, just drills it. And just mangled his hand. It's like, and immediately, it's bleeding. And his dad, I love farming, ranching people. His dad goes, "You'll be all right. It's a long way from your heart." That's awesome. And I'm looking at this. I'm an urban kid, I'm looking at him like, oh, wow. And so I'm like, hey, dude, take your hand and put it on your heart. Then it'll be close to your heart, and your father will see the blood dripping down your shirt. Oh, my goodness. And the kid just goes over to a horse trough, and just puts us in there, And I don't know if the horses like bloody water, but there it was, And then he gets back on that thing and starts cranking that deal. And I love that perspective of, like, we got work to do, no pity party. Yeah, it hurts. Let's go. You be sympathetic, but this thing in your kid's life, this thing is a long way from their heart. This difficult trial, this bad relationship, this experience of being mistreated, that it's a long way from the end of their life. And so we teach them to have a godly biblical perspective, and then what that does then is it moves them to action, because ultimately what we're doing here is they are going to be a blessing to others because of what they grow through in that. That's what Joseph was. God blessed him so that he would be a blessing to others. In your notes, I put a comparison chart in there of Joseph and the prodigal. I leave that one to you. But there you see the 6 things that we're wanting to build into our kids: respect, wisdom, forgiveness, destiny, work, and perspective. Okay, let me say this and then I'll be done. So I got a friend who's got 2 daughters. I got 2 daughters. I got a friend who's got 2 daughters. He's just way farther along in the journey than me. And I was talking to him about how expensive my children are, and kind of hoping for some sympathy, right? And he goes, now Vern, in 1984, both of my daughters got married. Now I'm going, because I don't know, someone might marry my daughter someday, and if they do, I'm paying for those stinking weddings, and so I'm like, you had to pay for 2 weddings in 1 year. So I thought that's what we were going to talk about. But instead, this is what he says. Vern, 1984, both my daughters got married. It was the biggest raise I got in my entire career. I'm like, oh yeah, somebody else was responsible for those chicks. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Now, so here's what's even more satisfying for that guy. Both his daughters are Josephinas. Both of them. There's this incredible satisfaction and reward as you raise your kids to be Josephs and Josephinas. Because they're going to make their own decisions. They are, and you want them to, but nobody's going to influence them more than their parents. We know that from the research. And you can guide them into godliness, and you can shape them to be respectful and wise and forgiving and to live with a sense of God's destiny for them, with a great work ethic and a biblical perspective that God is in control and that he can be trusted, because both of this guy's daughters, both of them are respectful and they're wise and they're forgiving and they have a sense of God's call on their lives, and they work particularly hard, and they have this great perspective about God's sovereign control of the universe and his love for them, and they then live in giving blessing to other people. You do these things and you have a better chance of raising a prophet than a prodigal. And one more thing. Pray like a madman. So let's pray. Will you bow your heads, please? And like we did last weekend, let me just give you the three. And I guess I'd like you to personalize them again for you, and then start thinking about your parenting for those of you that is applicable to. But are you living your life with a sense of destiny, with a sense of God's call and purpose on your life? Are you following God's choices or your own? Then there's the issue of work. Do you have the right perspective about work? Are you fulfilling God's promise in your life of this blessing of work? And are you working as unto the Lord? Are you working to honor your employer? God might want to do phenomenal things with you, and he's waiting for you to do the kind of work that is going to be necessary for you to then go to the level of blessing that he has in mind for you. Or is it the issue of perspective, where you've been a little bit paralyzed or handcuffed by the trials and difficulties, the hardships, the pits that you've been thrown in, the prison you've experienced, the lies that have been told about you, whatever it is. And you've forgotten that God is in control because you've been wanting all the control, but you're going to give it back to God. And do you have the proper perspective that a guy like Joseph did, that God really does love you and is in control and has a grand plan for your life? A few areas to think about while you go to pray, and then I'll close this up here in just a moment. Well, God, I again want to say thank you for the scripture, the stories, the historical events that have been preserved for us to learn and to pattern our lives after, and to even help us parent our little kids. Joseph, who's remarkable, and what a bullseye that he would be. May we raise Josephs and Josephinas. Pray, God, that you'd help our parents to prioritize their children and to strategize and order their lives around instilling these kinds of character qualities in their kids. And Lord, for our parents of teenagers, I pray that you would give them extra wisdom and blessing as they have just a few years left to instill some of these things in them. And I pray that it would be received with great joy in the home. I pray for each one of us that we would also begin to apply these things. Each one of us would be like a Joseph, and to be able to bring the kind of blessing to the world that he did. Good heavens, saving lives. It's just astonishing what you accomplished in a faithful guy, Lord, and we'd like to be like that, so help us, please. Again, Lord, I want to pray for those parents in the room today that have a prodigal. It is arguably the saddest thing in their life, and maybe ever. And God, I pray that you would give them a sense of your presence, your love and approval of them as parents. That you would confirm in them that they did a good job, that this story is not over yet, that their hand is a long way from the heart. The stuff they're going through is a long way from the end of their life. And you are a faithful God, and you are constantly pursuing their prodigal, and she will return, God. And I pray that you give them that confidence and that hope. God, I pray that you do not tarry. We trust you and your timing, but our prayer as humans is that you would make it quick, God, that they would return to you and grow, and through these difficult days there would be strength in the family that you would then use to bless others and to save even lives. And I pray this in Jesus' faithful name. Amen.